These were halted in the first place, picking back up in 2022, and now this first one in more than 2 years.
And hopefully we have time to even get into this, because this is kind of a deep subject, right? So, back in the day, we would hang people, and that got outlawed. Then there was electric chair, and that got outlawed. Firing squad, that got outlawed, even though that's making a comeback. So then we went to lethal injection, because it was seen by the courts and a lot of the public as a more humane way to conduct these procedures. But the people who are anti-death penalty were very effective in putting pressure on drug companies. Drug companies do not make drugs to kill people. Drug companies make drugs to help people and heal people, but used obviously in a different way, they can kill people. So anti-death penalty people went to these drug companies and said, hey, we don't want these drugs. I can't believe you're taking part in the capital punishment, and we're going to boycott you and things. So the drug company said, oh, of course we don't want to be a part of that, because think about it, 99.9999% of their drugs are used to heal people. And it's not like they're missing any business if they say to departments of corrections, which they did all across the country, you can't use our drugs anymore. So what happened was the Department of Corrections in states where the death penalty is legal still had to carry these out by law. So I don't want to say they started experimenting, but in a way that's kind of what happened. Where doctors would get together and say, well, we think that this much of this compounded drug will work, and I think that's what happened with Joseph Wood. We were looking at a brand new drug cocktail that we hadn't used before. He got some 15 doses of it, and yet he stayed on that table with his heart beating and breathing for 2 hours. Now, people call that a botched execution, and it didn't go the way the Department of Corrections wanted it to go, for sure, but it wasn't botched because he ended up dead at the end of it. So that's where we are. It looks like this new drug, pentobarbital, which is basically it's a sedative you get before you go under for surgeries, using the correct dose, has worked. The last execution I saw, this drug was used, and it did work as expected. So maybe they've got it to the point now where they've got it figured out. But the thing I'll say is this, anti-death penalty people have a view that is very valid. And if they don't want the death penalty anymore, talk to your legislator, bring it to the people. It's gotten closer over the years. Now I saw the latest poll, 53% are pro-death penalty, 47 are anti.
Yeah. Troy, I know that we don't have a lot of time here, but I do want to talk about your job specifically in that room, because to the average person, this seems like just completely almost bizarre. What does your day look like? What are you going to be doing?
So at 8 a.m., I go back behind these walls. We get screened. We can't have any electronics on us at all. They give us a pad and a pencil, and we sit in a room. And that's the most awkward part of it, I think, because you're making small talk with other members of the media. I think there's 5 total witnesses, killing time before you go see an execution. And generally, it's most people's first one, so they're nervous. Then we get the message. They grab us, and we walk all the way across Florence Prison. Now, interestingly enough, Florence Prison is shut down. The old prison, they don't use it anymore. There's only one building that's still being used, and that's the death house. So they'll walk us all the way back to the death house. There are 3 rows of benches. When you first walk in the room, there's a far row, a middle row, and a close row. The execution chamber, the lethal injection chamber, is on the left as you first walk in. The very back row are the victims' families and representatives. The middle row of benches is media and officials. And then the closest row is for the condemned. So we sit down, we walk in, there's a glass partition in front of us, and there are drapes closed. Then the drapes open up, and then you can see the condemned laying on the table. Now, in past executions, they'd be all covered up with a sheet. You wouldn't see anything. They'd come in and read the death warrant, and then the drugs would flow. That's changed. So now we actually see the technicians come in and find veins, put the IVs in. They put one in the thigh, they put one in the arm, and then they make a nod that they've got it. They leave the room, and there's also a microphone that the condemned can talk to all of us. And the last execution I was at, I mentioned in our 6:30 show, his name was Clarence Dixon, and he was talking to the victim's sister, saying that I won't repeat what he said, but saying things. And I don't know if that's. So anyway, he's able to look over and see us and talk to us. Right. Then the warden will come in and read the death warrant. basically, Aaron Gunches, you have been convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping and sentenced to death. Do you have any last words? And then you get the last words, whatever he decides to say. They walk out, the process begins, and generally the condemned will kind of just close their eyes, and there may be a little bit of labored breathing, and then about 3 or 4 minutes later, they come in and they put a stethoscope on his chest and see if his heart's still beating, and if it's not, they declare the execution over, and the curtains close, and we're escorted out. Oh, that's my job today.
Wow. Quickly, every execution you've been to, has everyone had last words?
Yeah, and some of them are bizarre. I remember one guy said "Boomer Sooner," which I had no idea what that even meant back in the day, but I guess he was an Oklahoma Sooners fan.
Oh, wow.
One of them said, "Let's get this over with."
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to think what the other ones were. I mean, nothing that really stood out, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the other thing was last meals. I mean, they used to make a big deal about last meals. One of the top people of Department of Corrections was out here today who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, and I asked her, I said, was there a last meal? And she's like, we're not talking about that. So I don't know if there was one or wasn't one, but they didn't want to comment on it. I do know that the condemned is brought into that little tiny, I said, the only building that's still being used in that huge facility. There's a cell in there, and they generally bring them in there the night before. And that's where they would generally have their last meal. And I think in years past, they were offered a mild sedative before they went in for the execution. But I don't know if that's the case, because, again, they're being very tight-lipped about it this time around.
Yeah, that's interesting that we no longer talk about, the last meal, which, of course, is something that we've, all heard of at some point. Troy Hayden, thank you so much for being with us this morning on Today in AZ, offering this perspective. You are going to be covering this today. No, he said he will head into Florence State Prison at 8 o'clock this morning. That execution of Aaron Gunches set to happen at 10 o'clock this morning. You are chosen as a media witness, and Troy will have more coverage for us throughout the day here on 12 News and 12 Plus, on our 1 o'clock, 4, 5, and 6 as well. And so, Troy, we'll see you in a little bit for more of your coverage.
Man, that perspective, my goodness.